I've recently purchased my first Eurorack system, which was a massive headache and completely overwhelming at first. So I thought I'd put this together to help anyone thinking about getting into Eurorack, but you're not sure where to start. And if you're thinking you're dipping your toe into the rabbit hole of modular synthesis, this is definitely the place to be. A couple of months ago, I was in the same boat as everyone else, pretty much clueless. I found that setting out on this journey was a bit like you have to know absolutely everything before you can decide on anything. So I thought it might be useful to simplify what I did into an easy to follow, step-by-step guide to help hone down what's a universe of modules and options into something that suits your needs, whatever they may be. So starting with the very basics, the terminology, the stats, to designing your system, and then building a case and your first modules. And in the next video, I'll talk you through my first basic modules and how it all fits together, how to patch everything to create your first sounds. And if you like this and find it useful, please subscribe or support the channel on the Starsky Car Patreon page. So the first 5 steps I'm going to talk about in this video are: Step 1, understanding the basics. What do all those confusing numbers, stats, and all that terminology mean? Step 2, decide what you want it to do. This is really important. Take your time to plan what you want and understand what it is you want it to do, and hone all those hundreds of options down into a more manageable list of kit that fits your needs. And then we take that list to step 3. And step 3 is where we shortlist the modules you'll look at further. So we get on Modular Grid to see what's available, and it's an amazing resource. It's got data on pretty much every module going. And that brings us to step 4. Now you have a short list of modules, you know how many modules you'll need and their approximate power consumption, so you'll have a good idea about the size and type of case you'll need. It might not be the sexiest of purchases, but there are loads of options from budget to really expensive. And once we've taken all this into consideration, we can finally move on to step 5, which is the first big purchase, your case. And once you're at this stage, you'll already have designed your system and know what modules you're going to be looking at buying, or at least what type of modules and how many. So if you follow this, you'll know what you're looking for and be in a position to focus all your thoughts onto your own individual system. Well, that's the plan anyway. So step 1, understanding the basics. When I first looked at modules, I'd seen numbers like 15 HP, 3U, 25 HP, 1U, and I realised this is extremely basic, but if you're not aware of what any of it means, it's just all confusing. So in short, U is the height and the HP number is the width. So here's a standard 3U sized module, and you can see in the rack behind me, it's the same size as this Line 6 Pod X3, which is a 3 unit, 19-inch rack effects unit. That's where it comes from, but I had no idea and it was really confusing. And I know that sounds absolutely stupid, but hopefully I'm not alone, and hopefully that will have been useful for someone. And actually, it's really handy if you buy a rackable case, so something like the Tip Top Happy Ending or the Behringer, is it the Behringer Eurorack rack it's called, which means you can easily fit it into any 19-inch rack. But you'll also find there are some 1U units, and here's a load of IntelliGel 1U modules. And to fit any of those into a modular case, you'll need either a case that accepts 1U units, normally sort of sideways, or you'll need a 3U to 1U adapter, which aren't actually that easy to get hold of. So if you like the 1U units, get a case that's built for them. So something like these IntelliGel or Make Noise cases. So it's getting a little bit complex already. You could end up buying a unit that you can't put in your rack, or you could end up buying a rack with a whole row of 1U space that you don't use. So now moving on to the HP, this simply means the horizontal pitch, HP, horizontal pitch. Again, it's a standard size with 1 HP being 1/5 of an inch or 5.08 millimeters, I think it is. And I think again, that's to do with 19-inch standard rack sizes. So this is 10U. And this is 60U, that's the Mother 32. Just to give you an idea of the scale, and you get about 95, which is 1.5 Mother 32s in a 19-inch rack. So here's the Arturia Rackbrute 6U. It's got 2 standard sized rows, hence it's a 6U rack. And it's 88 HP wide, so it's a 6U rack, although the power takes up 5 HP, so you can fit 171 HP worth of modules in it. And as I start listening to myself saying this, it really does sound confusing, but it's not really. HP is width, U is the height. So yes, it's all pretty basic and you might well be past this by now, but I can assure you there are plenty of people who aren't, me included about 8 weeks ago, and it's important to get to grips with all of this because it'll help you understand what you're going to need from your case, which, as I said in the intro, is what you're going to need to buy first. The other important parameter is power consumption. Some modules can be passive and don't need power at all, and others are real power hogs. And there are 3 power specs you'll see everywhere: 12 volt, minus 12 volt, and 5 volt. And I'll talk more about that in step 4 when we're looking at cases and power, but understanding that you need to consider the power is something that you'll keep an eye on in step 3 when you're looking at your units. So now we understand the basic concepts, step 2 is honing down the options from everything available into the ones that will get you where you need to be. And if you don't do this, you'll end up buying loads of sexy looking modules that don't necessarily work well together, or they duplicate functions you'll never use, and you may well miss some of the essential modules. And for me, I want something that can do things my standard synths and DAW can't replicate, or at least can't do easily, and something that could complement my semi-modulars. I've got a nice selection of analog synths and outboard effects, so the big question for me is, will it add more functionality, more sounds, and more importantly, will it be more fun and bring me some inspiration? I'm not too bothered about having percussive sounds. I've got the Dave Smith Tempest for analog tweakability on my drums, and I don't want to spend the best part of £1,000 to have another monosynth that is similar to other things I've got. So importantly, we want to get it as right as we can first time. It might not be perfect, but we might want to minimize the cash we're spending and wasted effort buying and selling stuff we're not going to use. So for me, I've got loads of analog oscillators, standard envelopes, arpeggiators, sequencers. So I want something that can do something different and can generate interesting patterns using non-standard sounds, followed by some modulatable effects perhaps. How on earth can you decide what to get? Take a look at eBay and watch YouTube demos. There's just so much stuff that goes on forever. Hundreds of types of every module conceivable, and they all look so cool. So for me, I started breaking it down and listed all the types and numbers of modules I thought I'd need. So really, it's breaking it down to 3 sections: signal flow, control, and utilities. So let's look at them one at a time, shall we? Firstly, signal flow. And unless you're going to use it as an effects rack, you'll need a sound source. For me, I wanted something that wasn't a standard analog oscillator, but I knew I needed something, possibly digital, so that goes on my list. Great, I've sorted the first type of module I'll need. And moving on to the filter, do you think you'll want a low pass only or state variable SCM, maybe something replicating synths like the Polyvox or the Wasp? It wasn't hugely important for me, but I thought either a multimode or a state variable will give me plenty of flexibility, so they're put on my list. And if you've more than one sound source, you'll need a mixer. I've got the Mother 32 plus the new digital oscillator I'm going to be buying, but there's a mixer on the Mother 32 that I can use for now, but I know I'll end up getting another sound source at some point or bringing in external signals, so I'll keep an eye out for one, but it's not urgent, so it goes on the list for something to watch out for, maybe pick up a used bargain. So that's the most basic signal flow, almost sorted. Just an effects maybe at the end of the chain. I've got the Big Sky reverb I can use for now, but I'd like some delay patched in, as it's nice. It is nice to patch in the delay and get the modulation bouncing around in time using the CV gates, perhaps, so you can sync it with your sequencers. And that's more important than it is for reverb. So reverb I can stick outside the box, as it were. Doesn't have to be modular. Delay, more important for it to be syncable and have those CV inputs. So I'll put a delay on there, but again, I'll put an asterisk next to it as it's not absolutely urgent. Or, well, maybe it is, because it'll sound really nice. Now we'll need something to control the signals, and we'll definitely need an envelope or two. I wanted an envelope where I could modulate the ADSR stages separately. It's something I can't do easily on other things, or I never really bother. I know I can do it on the Access TI, but I just don't bother. So I'm hoping that having the CV inputs on each of the sections will entice me to explore new ideas. And maybe you'll want a separate envelope for the filter and for the amplitude. So do you think you'll need 2? I think I will. For me, I thought one modulatable and one standard would work, but as I have the standard on the Mother 32 already, I only needed to look for one for now. So I'll add a modulatable envelope to my list. Then, how are you going to trigger your envelopes? You'll need either a sequencer in the rack or external sequencer or a keyboard. That might be MIDI or it might be CV. For me, probably the largest draw was those esoteric sequencers I've seen demoed on YouTube that act in ways my DAW just doesn't and can create those ever-evolving sequencers. So on the list for me goes a weird sequencer. I've got some ideas, but it all depends on the cost in the end. So I'm keeping my options open for now. And I do like a bit of sample and hold, and the Mother 32 doesn't have it. So I'd like something that could give a sample and hold signal, but it's not a priority. I imagine the sample and hold can be used for all sorts of nice randomness and all sorts of signals once everything's in place. So it's going on the list, but again, this one's not urgent. And then we'll need some boring but essential utilities. Maybe you want to control it with MIDI from another synth or your DAW, in which case you'll need a MIDI interface. I know it's something I want to do because if I've got a great sequence running, I prefer to sync it easily by plugging in a MIDI cable rather than trying to flex time some bubbling ambient atmosphere from 118.7 BPM to something like 128. Give me a cable every time. So on the list goes a MIDI interface. And for me, I think I've got the very basics I need to start here. But what else could be useful? Once you have a number of signals bouncing around, it's always useful to have a mult or two to split the signals. There's a mult here on the Mother 32, so it's not desperate for now, but I'll probably need more than one. So that'll go on the list as well. And I think that's my basic requirements now. I can start from these. But because I want to make for sure I've got the cache to expand, I'll take a quick look at some of the other modules I might keep an eye out for that I want to get to complete the system and the sort of modular vision. And I need to make sure I've sized my case so I'm not going to outgrow it too quickly. So I'll make another little list for the future, and as I want this to be an experimental setup, I'm also thinking about picking up a function generator, something like the Make Noise Maths or the Rene, is it, which combines all sorts of stuff in various ways, modulating in its own sequences. So I'm aware of this stuff, but not fully researched it yet. But let's add one to the future purchases. What exactly is a function generator? Well, they do all sorts of things, like at the very basic, they'll take a couple of voltages and either add them or subtract them. But you can do things like combine different modulation signals to create much more complex modulation. But then, if you're using something like that to control the pitch of an oscillator, you might need something to keep that in tune. So I'm going to add a quantizer, put one of those on the list as well. And this is where I found this started to get a little bit more complicated, and there'll always be something you've forgotten or not even realised you'll need. But for me, this is the really interesting part. It's also the part that had me completely bamboozled when I was thinking about all the things I needed to understand to get to this point. But now we're at this point and we're concentrating on just these functions alone and what they do, because we've already got a good idea about the other modules we need for our basic setup, so we can forget about them for now and concentrate sort of on the fun stuff. But again, here I'm not necessarily deciding on exactly which one to buy, just giving myself an idea of what there is and what can be done, and having a small selection in mind. So now we have our list of modules. Everyone will have different ideas and your list will be unique, although I imagine pretty much everyone will have the same basic essentials, unless you're using it as an effects rack. Now we know what we want our system to do, we know what all the numbers and stats mean, it's time to look at how to put it all together while keeping an eye on all the relevant stats. And we head over to modulargrid.net for this. And this is quite simply the best resource for designing a virtual system. And here you can see other people's rigs. And this is one of Aphex Twins. We can see he's using a 7U IntelliGel case with 2 rows of 3 and a single U at the top. And we can examine all the modules, get all the stats and all the prices. It's a dangerous game looking at other people's rigs. Here's Richard Devine's live setup, and how much is this? Looks cool, €549. And what about this? 535. How about Rainmaker? 592, so we're well over €1,500, and we've just looked at 3 things. But if you're good with a soldering iron and have got the patience of a saint, which I don't, and I don't have the skills either, you can save a small fortune if you look at DIY modules. But unfortunately, I haven't got the skills all the time. Now back to my modular grid. The first thing to do is choose a rack. And at this stage, you probably won't know exactly what size you'll need. As I said in the intro, when starting with Eurorack, you seem to have to know everything before you can decide on anything. So just choose one and start creating. You can search modules by function, manufacturer, etc. Here's a couple I designed that fitted the bill to start with. On this one I use the Mother 32 as I already own it. It's Eurorack compatible and gives me an oscillator, filter, envelope and an LFO. And the case I've put it in here is the same size as the Tip Top Mantis and the Behringer Go cases. And then I looked at the size of the thing and the cost, keeping an eye on the stats here at the bottom, and believe me, things get out of hand really quickly. So I thought about a smaller system and started this one, which I decided didn't allow enough room for expansion. And knowing what I'm like, it'd probably have only been a matter of weeks before I was looking at a larger case. So in the end, I went with something between these two. As I wanted something out of the ordinary as an oscillator and almost semi-modular, I've got analog oscillators as I said, I started looking for a wavetable oscillator, and you can easily search everything here until you've just a few modules in the running. So here I'm looking for a wavetable oscillator. Ericasynths comes up first, €280. Comparing it with what else we have here, it goes on my shortlist, as does the Make Noise Sheep and the Mutable Braids, all well-known manufacturers and all within my price range. And Mutables Platts is in the mix as well, as I've used the wavetables on the Minilog XD, so I'm already aware of it, although I've now already got an albeit cut down version of those wavetables in the XD, so maybe something different would be better. So I did a bit of research, YouTube is the place, and I found the Ericasynths wavetable oscillator was really flexible, has loads of tones, and you can add additional wavetables as well. So it fits the bill perfectly. And at this point I also realised Ericasynths is the company that have recently manufactured the limited edition of the synthy inspired synth called the Syntrix, which I've been lusting after and never knew they made modular gear because until now I've not really been into the whole modular scene. So this gave me the confidence to go with their module. I know it might seem a bit shallow, but buying from a respected company always gives me a little bit of confidence. Click on the plus sign, add it to my system and then start keeping an eye out to buy one. So I'm not discounting anything on my shortlist yet. Of course, you know, if a Mutable Sheep appears on eBay at half price in excellent condition, well, that might be going in the rack instead. But it's that simple to research them on this, and the amount of data is staggering. It's got pretty much everything you need here. So next on my list is the filter, looking for a multi-mode or SEM style. Again, I quickly saw this one from Ericasynths. And my thinking being it was a really respected manufacturer, sounds great, and matched the look of the oscillator. The Mother 32 is black, the oscillator is black, and now the filter's black. So I started trying to keep a theme, although I'm not sure how long it'll last. And at this point I'm starting to think of it as a single system while having some interchangeable ideas in my head. So it really feels like the plan's coming together.
I love it when a plan comes together.
For the envelopes, as I said, I wanted one I could modulate. Look for envelope, looking for one with individual CV inputs for the A, D, S and R. And here again we have the Ericasynths, and for me a quick search brought up Matek Modular in Manchester, just down the road from me in Liverpool. It's in the sale and it's in my car within a second and it's in the studio the next day. So some choices were really easy. So when I say the case is your first purchase, I actually jumped the gun a little here myself. So what else do I have on the list? Well, we've got sample and hold. I've considered the Expert Sleepers Distant, which is a really flexible unit with loads of different functions, but I'm starting getting conscious of costs, and looking down here we have another Ericasynths. It's an LFO and sample and hold, and it's great value, so that's on the lookout list as well. And let's put it in the case for now. So all looking rather sexy. Now for an effects unit, focusing on the delays. I'd looked across a few effects and there's loads of choice and was tempted by a couple in the end. Again, Ericasynths BBD and the Black Hole. Pittsburgh Modular BBD, this one's discontinued. There's the current one. And the Tip Top Z500 looks good, but discontinued. So keep it on the shortlist, it may come up for used on eBay, so worth bearing in mind. But what we have now is a real focus on what we're looking for to get the functionality we want. So I've added the eventide as it's a high-end effect that'll push the price up so I can see really where I'm aiming. And looking here, we're almost up to €1,800 minus the Mother 32, which I already own, brings it to around €1,250, £1,100 and just under $1,500. So now I'm in trouble with the wife. Good job there's no summer holiday plan this summer, and I better start reining things in a bit. Good job I went for the smaller case on here as well. Back to my list now, and I need to get a sequencer in here, and for me this was by far the hardest part. Where'd you start? There's so many, and I'm expecting it might take a few goes to get the right one for me, but I've got an idea about what I'm looking for. I wanted something non-linear, something that can produce variations. I like, for example, the electron probability function, so you can set the probability that a note will sound on every pass. Things like that are something that I don't do on my DAW, although I hope now maybe some of you will have some suggestions. If you have any, put them in the comments, as they'd be very welcome. So probability based or fractal sequencers for the DAW, you know, that sort of thing. So looking down here, I don't want anything that looks too traditional and discounting anything to do with drums. I'll set the search to popular, which might help whittle things down a little. And then this turned into a whole rabbit hole of sequencer goodness. On the list goes marbles, pressure points, qubit bloom, and the IntelliGel Steppy. So there's my basic system, or at least an outline of what I'm planning. And this now allows me to start taking a look at what should have been my first purchase. And that's something to put them all in and something to power them. Which brings us neatly onto step 4, where we'll look at cases. But one thing I should mention before we go on here is if you're planning on buying some older units, they might have deep profiles. So this is a new unit, and it's got, its board is parallel to the faceplate. Some of the older units, the board's perpendicular, which means it won't fit in a thinner skiff. Skiff just means a slim case. And we can see that if we look at modular grid. So here's the setup I've chosen. And if we just look down here on the bottom right, there's the data sheet, and you can see here the width of all the modules. And if we just scroll down to the bottom, you can see that the power supply from the Arturia Rackbrute is 80mm, and all the others are sort of 25 to 35. And here it is in all its 80mm glory, perpendicular to the faceplate. And lucky for us, just really easily at the bottom of the table, it gives you the maximum depth you're going to need. So some cases are slimmer than others. I think Behringer's 104 case, that looks very much like the Moog equivalent. I think the Moog's a bit deeper than the Behringer. So just things that you need to consider. So think of the combination of the case and the module. I've gone for this Arturia 6U Rackbrute, which I mentioned earlier. It's similar to the rack I was using on the modular grid setup. So decided against something as large as the Behringer, just too big for me at the minute. It takes up a huge amount of space, and it's the same size as the Tip Top Mantis, which is another I was considering. So really, size does matter. It really can be too big. So sticking with the macho themes from size to power. Initially, I was looking to see if I could build a case, or not build a case, but put something together from DIY parts other people have built. I thought that might be cheaper than buying any of the sort of powered cases, but I quickly found that the power plus the case seems to be costing more than what I wanted. And just to explain the difference in power supplies for a minute, because it does come up on forums and discussions. For power, there are two main types. The first is a fly-in bus board, which has the power connectors on a flexible cable, a bit like this tip-top one here. And secondly, power supplies where the connections are on the board, like on this Arturia. For DIY cases, the fly-in bus board may be more suitable, as you don't have to place the board in place. You can just sort of flex the cable through. And looking here for some examples, a power supply for 6U is around £100. It's got more power than the case I've bought, but it's probably overpowered for what I need. And I know that from my modular grid data. There are some really attractive cases you can get from eBay that people have made themselves, like this lovely handcrafted wooden design here. It's a lovely looking case. It's 2x104 HP, so the same size as the Behringer Go and the Tip Top Mantis. So you can see we're already getting the hang of the language. So this plus the power we've just looked at is £300. And even though it's a good looking case, I felt safer with an all-in-one solution because somebody who knows more than me has put it together in the first place. And looking at the Arturia, it's got 32 power slots, so I can power 32 units, which seems plenty when they seem to cost at least £100, and I'm not planning on spending over £3 grand. But do be aware though that some modules take a bit more juice to power up, especially if they've got valves in them, so the working voltage is lower than the maximum power drain when it's turned on. So that can cause problems. Both the Tip Top Mantis and the Behringer Go supply 3000 milliamps, so I imagine nothing will ever be a concern there. It seems huge, but if you've got a lot of CPUs running and effects and stuff, you might just need that much. But I'm confident for me that the Arturia will be fine. But just to show, you do have to be careful. If you put, for example, a Behringer neutron in your system, you've just eaten into a whole load of power. It typically uses up to 750 milliamps, but states in its manual you need 1000 milliamp power adapter to be on the safe side, which means you've eaten into most of your available power on a single, albeit huge unit. And one last thing on power, some users have reported loud or noisy power supplies, so maybe worth a Google to double check whatever your choice may be. But now we understand the size and the power, what else is there? Sliding nuts or threaded strips. I know it's not quite as important as your power or the size, but there's quite a debate about them online. Threaded strips seem to be the preferred method, as you should always be able to screw into the hole in the correct place without trying to place the nut in the correct place first. And we can see that the Arturia has drilled holes at a standard pitch, so the modules simply screw straight in. But beware, because if your module's not exactly the right size, you might end up with some gaps between them if it's a millimetre over or a millimetre under. It's not common, but it does happen. I've read about it. You know, it's not happened to me, but I've not bought thousands of units, have I? With the sliding nuts, you need to get the nut in place first, which is a bit of a fiddle, but not impossible, and I can see why people don't like them. I'm sure you'll get used to either method, but if it's a choice between two competing cases, it just might help you decide. And there's also a question of portability, of course. Does it need to be, or does it need a cover? Will it stay in your studio? Are you considering gigging it? And what about expanding your system? And although the Arturia doesn't look as sturdy as a carry case, for me, it meets my requirements, which is just basically moving it from one room to the other. It's not too big. It's got this this handle. You sort of twist these nuts here, and you have a handle, and you can connect another system. And if you've got the two together, you've got these little flip out things here. Can you see them in the shot? Which way do I go? That way. So that it protects your modules. So for me, I'm not gigging it, not taking it outside anywhere. This will be more than fine. So I can expand my system with the Arturia. I can get another little 3U or another 6U, put them together. The tip-top Mantis is also expandable, but not as portable. And I'm probably throwing in more questions than answers here, but just considering these options should help you to focus your search onto a few items. And finally, the starter kits like the Create Audio Nifty bundle, which is about £240, $270. And that's got a built-in power supply and comes with a synth module and a touch CV panel. And this is a great little kit, especially as you get the little synth and the touchpad. Just another option to think about. And this plus a few essentials may well be enough for you. But hopefully, if you followed these steps, you can get to this point having identified a few potential options, which is, as if by magic, or it's like I've even planned what I'm going to say here, brings us neatly onto step 5, which is buying your first case. So why did I end up going with the Arturia? Well, firstly, I discounted anything with the 1U housings. As I said earlier, manufacturers like Make Noise and Intelligel make these cases that can house the smaller 1U modules, which is actually a really nice idea with some useful controls that you can fit at the centre or the top, just like the Aphex Twin setup we saw on Modular Grid. But for me, they just seemed so expensive compared to the smaller sized units. But it's $599, it's £300 more, £350 more. Intelligel is smaller, it's same price at 600, and I think that's 7U and it's 84, so it's a little bit thinner. It's not quite as wide as the Arturia, although it's got those that row of 1U tiles. But again, it's £600 as opposed to around 300. So that additional cash, as I'm setting out, that could buy me an oscillator and a filter, or a really nice sequencer, which it has actually. So that's not to say that at a later date I won't upgrade if I feel the need, or the convenience of the 1 unit becomes more obvious with experience, or once I discover how I tend to use the system and change the setup to suit my workflow. Who knows? But I'm sure that's why they've been developed by two really experienced and respected companies, Intelligel and Make Noise. There's got to be a reason for it. But for now, I've shut them out of the equation. Just too much money. The Create Audio Nifty pack also doesn't suit my needs. Although it's a great little bundle, for me the extra space was more important than the modules. I don't need another little synth module, and I don't need the touchpad. And although it's great for demoing what you can do with CV and introducing the whole sort of concept of CV modular control, it just isn't in my thinking from the outset, which is why, step 2 is so important. What is it you want it to do? Don't end up buying stuff that isn't going to suit your workflow or what you want it to do. But, and that's why I keep on repeating this. Try and be led by what you need, not what you can get hold of. If it works for you, then great. I've heard some great reviews of it, so I'm not saying it's a terrible thing in any way. It's just not for me. So none of them are bad choices. So yeah, went with the Arturia. It's priced between the Behringer Go and the Tip Top Mantis, but the size suits me more. It fits on my desk and I can easily move it around. And I've been doing some stuff in the kitchen, so portability is paramount for me. I know this is shallow, but it actually does look pretty cool. I really like the nice little the wooden side panels on it and stuff, very Instagrammable. One additional quick tip is getting hold of these nuts called Bafaco Knurlies or Bafaco. They just make taking the modules in and out so much easier than messing around with screwdrivers. They're expensive for screws, considering you get free screws in most of the boxes when you buy something. £30 for 100, but I think it's really well worth it, especially when you're sort of mixing modules around and you're trying to find out how to put the whole thing together. So we've worked out what we want, we've used Modular Grid to help us understand what's available, enjoyed watching some demos on YouTube, saved some cash hopefully, and finally took the plunge and bought our first case. And in the next video I'll be taking a look at some of the modules I've bought and why. I'll be plugging them in and showing how they sort of work together in creating tones. But now I've chosen everything and finding my biggest headache is where to place them. There's so many options and none of them are perfect, and I'm trying to work out which would require the shortest cable. But I think I've settled on this for now. So finally, here they are in all their sexy black outfits, which I'm sure won't last because I doubt everything I need will be color coded for me. And you can see in the bottom right hand corner there that I've got some blank panels. So going back to Modular Grid, I can see that's 35 wide, and on the top right it's about 3 wide. And you can easily get blank panels to fill these spaces. You've probably seen them before. So what have we got here? Lots of different sizes and colours. Well, black and white. So I could buy a 20 HP plus a 10 HP plus 5 HP. It cost me about £15, but I'm not going to do that because I do have other units on the way and some in the studio already, so I don't need that for now. I'm going to somehow muddle with this little thing for a day or two at least. So that's it, we're off. We have our first modular synth designed at long last. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe and support the channel over on Patreon. I've got a nice little series running at over 6 hours showing how to program pretty much any synth by examining each of the functions in detail with step-by-step tutorials using Tal Noisemaker, enabling you to sculpt your own tones and presets and get them to fit perfectly in your mix. It's well worth a look, and it'll definitely help with understanding how each module on a modular system works and how it all fits together. Well, I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere. I really hope so, because it took me ages to put this together. So cheers, and I'll see you next time.